Eleanor Whitmore had everything: wealth, prestige, and a future mapped out in marble halls, until one devastating night stripped it all away, leaving her trapped in a wheelchair and drowning in whispers of pity. When a quiet janitor promised her the impossible, "I'll help you walk," she dismissed him as delusional, but Caleb Morris saw something in Eleanor that even her own family had forgotten: her unbreakable spirit. As forbidden glances turned into secret sessions and healing touches sparked a love that defied every social boundary, Eleanor discovered that the greatest prison wasn't her disability. It was the cage of other people's expectations. But when family ultimatums threaten to tear them apart, and anonymous threats surface in the shadows, Eleanor must choose between the safety of her gilded world and a love that could either destroy everything she's ever known or set her free. Will the heiress risk losing her fortune for the one man who believes she can rise again? Or will the weight of scandal crush their impossible romance before it even begins? If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're from, because this love story will challenge everything you think you know about strength, courage, and what it really means to stand up for what matters most. The brass elevator buttons gleamed under the soft lobby lights as Eleanor Whitmore pressed the up arrow for the third time. Her designer wheelchair sat perfectly straight, her posture flawless despite the exhaustion weighing on her shoulders. The physical therapy session had been a disaster. Again. "Come on," she whispered to the unmoving elevator doors. The building's evening quiet wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. Most residents of the historic Whitmore Manor, her family's luxury residential building, were already settled in for the night. Eleanor preferred it this way: fewer people to watch her struggle with the simple things that used to be so easy. The elevator finally arrived with a soft ding. As the doors slid open, Eleanor rolled forward, but her wheel caught on something. The chair lurched sideways, threatening to tip. Her heart hammered as she gripped the armrests, trying to steady herself. "Easy there," a calm voice came from behind her. Strong hands appeared at the sides of her wheelchair, not touching her, but ready to help if she fell. The chair settled back into place with gentle pressure. Eleanor's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She turned to see a man in dark blue work clothes, a cleaning cart beside him. He was tall, with kind brown eyes and calloused hands that spoke of honest work. She recognized him as one of the building's maintenance staff, though she'd never spoken to him before. "The threshold strip must have shifted," he said, crouching down to examine the elevator entrance. "I'll make sure it gets fixed tomorrow." His voice was quiet, respectful. He didn't fuss over her or ask if she was hurt. He simply treated her like a capable adult who'd hit a small snag. "I'm fine," Eleanor said, her voice sharper than she intended. "Thank you." The man straightened up and stepped back, giving her space. "Of course. Have a good evening, Miss Whitmore." He knew her name, but she didn't know his. The thought bothered her more than it should have. Eleanor rolled into the elevator and pressed the button for the 8th floor. As the doors began to close, the man spoke again. "I'll help you walk." The words hit her like cold water. Eleanor's fingers shot out to stop the doors, but they had already sealed shut. The elevator began its slow climb, carrying her away from the impossible promise that echoed in her mind. Help her walk? The nerve of him. She was Eleanor Whitmore, not some charity case. She had the best doctors money could buy, the finest physical therapists in the city. If they couldn't help her walk again after 18 months, what could a janitor possibly do? Yet something in his voice had been so certain, so gentle. Not like he was promising a miracle, but like he was simply stating a fact. Eleanor shook her head as the elevator reached her floor. She was tired, that's all. The failed therapy session had left her emotional and vulnerable. She was reading too much into a stranger's casual comment. But as she rolled down the hallway to her apartment, she couldn't stop thinking about those steady brown eyes and that quiet promise. The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching Eleanor's mood perfectly. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone while Ruth Keller, her assistant, organized the day's schedule. "Dr. Martinez wants to see you next Tuesday," Ruth said, flipping through her tablet. "And your mother called about dinner this weekend." Eleanor nodded absently. She'd barely slept, replaying the elevator encounter over and over. The janitor's words felt like an insult disguised as hope. How dare he suggest something so impossible? How dare he make her think, even for a moment, that there might be another way? "Eleanor?" Ruth's voice cut through her thoughts. "Are you listening?" "Sorry." Eleanor forced herself to focus on Ruth's familiar face. Ruth had been with her for 3 years now, since before the accident. She was practical and loyal, never treating Eleanor like she was made of glass. "I said your Uncle Thomas wants to stop by this afternoon. Something about building improvements." Eleanor sighed. Thomas meant well, but his visits always felt like inspections. He worried about her living alone, worried about her safety, worried about everything. "Fine. What else?" Ruth rattled off a list of calls to return and deliveries to expect. Normal things that used to feel important, but now seemed like busy work to fill the empty hours. After Ruth left to run errands, Eleanor found herself rolling toward the window that overlooked the building's main courtyard. Below, she could see the maintenance staff working in the gardens. Her breath caught when she spotted the man from the elevator. He moved with easy confidence, trimming bushes with careful precision. There was something peaceful about watching him work. He didn't rush or cut corners. Every movement had purpose. Before she could talk herself out of it, Eleanor made her way to the elevator. She found him in the main corridor on the second floor, quietly mopping the marble floors. "Excuse me," she said, her voice echoing in the empty hallway. He looked up, surprised but not startled. "Miss Whitmore, good morning." "About what you said last night." Eleanor paused, suddenly feeling foolish, but she'd come this far. "What did you mean when you said you'd help me walk?" He set down his mop and gave her his full attention. "I meant exactly that. If you want help, I'm willing to give it. I have physical therapists. I have doctors. What could you possibly do that they can't?" "I'm not talking about replacing your doctors," he said calmly. "I'm talking about practice. Real practice, every day, small steps, building strength and confidence." Eleanor felt her anger rising. "You think it's that simple? You think I haven't tried? You think I haven't worked harder than you can imagine to?" "I don't think anything except that you're stronger than you know," he interrupted gently. "And sometimes, having someone believe in you makes all the difference." The sincerity in his voice stopped her cold. Eleanor stared at him, this stranger who spoke with such quiet certainty about her strength when she felt anything but strong. "I don't even know your name," she said finally. "Caleb Morris." He didn't offer to shake her hand, didn't move closer, just stood there, patient and steady. "Mr. Morris, Caleb's fine." "Caleb." The name felt strange on her tongue. "Why would you offer to help me? You don't know me." "I know enough." His eyes held hers steadily. "I know what it's like to be underestimated. I know what it's like when people look at you and see what you can't do instead of what you can." Before Eleanor could respond, the lights flickered. The hallway dimmed as the building's electrical system hiccuped. Emergency lighting hummed to life, casting strange shadows on the walls. Caleb immediately moved toward the stairwell, checking to make sure it was clear. He pulled out his phone and called someone about the power situation. Eleanor watched him take charge of the moment with calm efficiency, making sure residents would be safe if the elevators stopped working. "All good," he said, returning to where she waited. "Just a temporary glitch." The regular lights came back on, but something had shifted in the dimness. Eleanor had seen another side of Caleb Morris, competent, caring, the kind of person others could depend on in a crisis. "I should go," she said, suddenly flustered. "Of course." He picked up his mop again. "Think about what I said, Miss Whitmore. I meant it." Eleanor nodded and rolled toward the elevator, her mind spinning. In the space of 5 minutes, this quiet man had challenged everything she thought she knew about her limitations, and the most unsettling part was that she was starting to believe him. By afternoon, Eleanor's brief moment of hope had curdled into frustration. She'd spent the last hour trying to transfer from her wheelchair to her bed alone, determined to prove she didn't need anyone's help. The first few attempts went fine. But then she got overconfident, tried to move too quickly, and felt her grip slip. She caught herself before falling, but the near miss left her shaken and angry. A sharp knock at her door interrupted her brooding. Eleanor opened it to find her mother, Margaret Whitmore, standing in the hallway with an overnight bag and a worried expression. "Mother, what are you doing here?" Margaret swept into the apartment, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the weather. She was an elegant woman who carried herself like the society queen she'd once been. But Eleanor could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I heard about the power outage," Margaret said, setting down her bag. "I thought you might need company until they figure out what's wrong with the electrical system." "It was 5 minutes, Mother. Everything's fine." "Is it?" Margaret's sharp blue eyes swept over Eleanor's apartment, taking in every detail. "You look tired, darling. Are you eating enough?" Eleanor bit back her automatic defensive response. She loved her mother, but Margaret's protectiveness could feel suffocating. Ever since the accident, her family had treated her like she might break at any moment. "I'm eating fine. Ruth makes sure of that." "Ruth is wonderful, but she's not family." Margaret settled into the leather armchair across from Eleanor's wheelchair. "Thomas thinks you should consider moving back to the estate, at least temporarily, until your therapies start showing more progress." There it was, the real reason for the visit. Eleanor's Uncle Thomas controlled the family's business interests and had strong opinions about everything, including where Eleanor should live. "I'm not moving back home, Mother. This is my home." "But darling, you're so isolated here. And with these power problems?" "One power glitch doesn't make the building unsafe." Margaret's voice softened with love and worry. "I just want you to be happy and safe. Is that so terrible?" Eleanor's anger melted a little. Her mother's fears came from a place of love, even if they felt like prison bars sometimes. But before she could answer, another knock came at the door. Eleanor opened it to find Thomas Whitmore in the hallway, his expensive suit still crisp despite the weather. Her uncle was a tall man with thinning hair and sharp features. He'd helped raise Eleanor after her father died, but his love always came with conditions and expectations. "Uncle Thomas, Mother didn't mention you were coming too." "I was in the building anyway, checking on the electrical situation with building management." He kissed her cheek and walked past her into the apartment. "We can't have our residents dealing with unreliable power." The way he said, "our residents," reminded Eleanor that her family owned this building. She lived here by choice, but it was still her family's property. Sometimes that felt like another form of dependence. "The power's fine now," Eleanor said, closing the door perhaps a little too firmly. Thomas nodded absently, his attention already moving to other concerns. Good. But these old buildings require constant maintenance, which reminds me, I met with the building supervisor about upgrading our staff protocols, making sure all our people are properly trained and screened. Something cold settled in Eleanor's stomach. What do you mean by that? Oh, just routine improvements. Background checks, customer service training, that sort of thing. We want to make sure our residents feel completely comfortable with all our employees. The way Thomas avoided her eyes told Eleanor there was more to the story. But before she could ask, Margaret jumped in with questions about dinner plans and whether Eleanor needed anything from the store. The conversation drifted into normal family territory: business updates, social gossip, plans for the holidays. But Eleanor felt distracted, thinking about Caleb's quiet offer to help and wondering why Thomas was suddenly concerned about staff protocols. As evening approached and her family prepared to leave, Eleanor found herself exhausted by their loving attention. They meant well, but every suggestion felt like evidence that they didn't trust her to manage her own life. After they left, Eleanor sat alone in her apartment, staring out at the city lights. She thought about what Caleb had said, that she was stronger than she knew. Her family seemed to think the opposite, that she needed constant protection and management. For the first time in months, Eleanor wondered what would happen if she trusted someone outside her careful, controlled world. What would happen if she let a stranger believe in her strength instead of her limitations? The question scared her more than she wanted to admit, but it also sparked something that felt dangerously close to hope. The next morning brought clearer skies and a determination Eleanor hadn't felt in weeks. She'd spent the night thinking about strength and choices, and what it meant to trust someone with your vulnerability. Ruth arrived with coffee and croissants, chattering about her weekend plans as she organized Eleanor's schedule. But Eleanor was only half listening. She kept thinking about Caleb's steady voice saying, "Sometimes having someone believe in you makes all the difference." "Ruth," Eleanor interrupted suddenly, "do you know anything about the building's maintenance staff? Their training, their backgrounds?" Ruth paused with her tablet halfway to her mouth. "That's a random question. Why?" "Uncle Thomas mentioned something yesterday about staff protocols. I was just curious." "Well, they all go through background checks, of course, and the head of maintenance has been here for 15 years. Why? Has someone made you uncomfortable?" "No, nothing like that." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. There was a small issue with the elevator the other night, and one of the staff members was very helpful. I wanted to make sure he gets recognized for good service." It wasn't entirely a lie. Caleb had been helpful. But Eleanor knew she was really asking, because Thomas's comments had made her wonder what her uncle might be planning. Ruth smiled. "That's sweet of you. What's his name? I can make sure building management knows." "Caleb Morris." "Oh, Caleb, he's lovely. Been here about 6 months. The residents really like him. He's quiet but always willing to help. Mrs. Patterson on 5 raves about how he fixed her garbage disposal last month." Eleanor felt oddly relieved to hear that other residents thought well of Caleb. It confirmed her instinct that he was trustworthy. "Good," she said. "That's good to know." After Ruth left for her errands, Eleanor made a decision that surprised even her. She rolled down to the building's small fitness center on the 3rd floor. It wasn't much, just a few exercise machines and some basic physical therapy equipment that the building provided for residents' convenience. She hadn't been down here since the accident. The sight of the treadmill and weight machines had felt too painful, too much like a reminder of everything she'd lost. But today, she forced herself to look around with new eyes. The space was empty except for one person, Caleb, cleaning the mirrors and checking the equipment for safety issues. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. "Miss Whitmore, I didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I," Eleanor admitted. She rolled closer, taking in the parallel bars set up near the windows. I haven't been down here since before. Understandable. Caleb's voice was gentle, without pity. Sometimes the hardest part is just showing up. Eleanor nodded, feeling the truth of that statement. About what you said yesterday, about helping me walk. You don't have to decide anything right now, Caleb said quickly. I just wanted you to know the offer was real. What would it involve, hypothetically? Caleb set down his cleaning supplies and gave her his full attention. Nothing dramatic, nothing unsafe. Just practice with basic movements. Transfers, balance, maybe some supported standing. Building up strength and confidence, one small step at a time. Eleanor looked at the parallel bars again. She could imagine herself gripping them, trying to support her own weight. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. My doctors say the nerve damage is permanent, she said quietly. They say I'll never walk normally again. I'm not talking about walking normally, Caleb replied. I'm talking about walking, period. Even a few steps can change everything about how you see yourself and how others see you. The way he said it made Eleanor's chest tight with emotion. When was the last time someone had talked to her about possibilities instead of limitations? I would want Ruth to know, Eleanor said suddenly. If we did this, I wouldn't want there to be any misunderstandings about what it was. Of course. Caleb nodded seriously. Everything completely professional and transparent. Your comfort and reputation come first. Eleanor felt a flutter of something she'd almost forgotten. Excitement about the future. It was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. Just this once, she said before she could lose her nerve. Show me what you mean about supported standing. Caleb's face lit up with a smile that transformed his entire expression. Just this once, he agreed. He moved around the room quickly, checking that the equipment was stable and safe. Then he positioned her wheelchair next to the parallel bars and locked the wheels securely. The most important thing is that you feel in control, Caleb said, standing where she could see him clearly. You set the pace, you decide how far to push, you say when to stop. I'm just here to make sure you're safe. Eleanor gripped the parallel bars and tried to lift herself from her chair. Her arms shook with effort, and for a moment she thought she couldn't do it. But then Caleb's voice cut through her doubt. You're doing it. Don't think about what comes next. Just focus on right now. And suddenly, Eleanor was standing. Not for long, not steadily, but standing on her own 2 feet with her hands gripping the bars for support. Tears sprang to her eyes as she looked down at her legs holding her weight. I'm standing? She whispered. You are, Caleb agreed, his voice warm with pride and joy. How does it feel? Scary, amazing, like I might fall any second. But you haven't fallen. You're stronger than you think. Eleanor lowered herself back into her wheelchair, with Caleb spotting her carefully. She was shaking, partly from effort and partly from emotion. In just a few minutes, he'd shown her something her doctors had said was impossible. Thank you, she said, wiping tears from her cheeks. Thank you for trusting me, Caleb replied, even just this once. As Eleanor rolled toward the elevator later, she felt lighter than she had in months. The future suddenly seemed full of possibilities she'd never dared to imagine. But as the elevator doors closed behind her, she also felt the weight of what she'd just started. Trusting Caleb meant risking hope, and hope was the most dangerous thing of all. Because if it didn't work out, if she couldn't really walk again, the fall back to reality would be devastating. But for the first time since her accident, Eleanor thought that risk might be worth taking. The first part of their story was just beginning, and already everything was changing. The whispers started 3 days later. Eleanor first noticed them in the elevator, when Mrs. Chen and Mr. Rodriguez fell silent the moment she rolled in. Their conversation had been animated until the doors opened, but now they stood stiff and uncomfortable, avoiding her eyes. She tried to tell herself it was coincidence. People got quiet in elevators all the time, but then it happened again in the lobby and again when she passed a group of residents in the garden courtyard. "Ruth," Eleanor said that afternoon, watching her assistant sort through mail with unusual intensity. "Is there something you're not telling me?" Ruth's hands stilled on the envelopes. She looked up with the expression of someone who'd been dreading this conversation. "There's been some talk," Ruth said carefully. "Nothing serious, just, you know how people are." "What kind of talk?" Ruth sighed and set down the mail. "Someone saw you in the fitness room with Caleb the other day, and then Mrs. Patterson mentioned seeing him helping you with something near the elevator. People are just curious." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "Curious about what, exactly?" "About why you're spending time with him. About whether it's appropriate." The word hung in the air like a judgment. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks, partly from embarrassment and partly from anger. She and Caleb had done nothing wrong, nothing inappropriate. But she could already see how it might look to others, the wealthy heiress and the black maintenance worker, spending time alone together. "There's nothing inappropriate happening," Eleanor said firmly. "He's helping me with some basic physical therapy exercises. That's all." "I know that," Ruth said quickly. "And anyone who knows you would know that, but you know how people can be when they don't have all the facts." Eleanor knew exactly how people could be. She'd lived in this world of whispers and assumptions her whole life, but it had never felt so personal before, so threatening to something she cared about. "What are they saying, specifically?" Ruth hesitated. "Just that it's unusual for someone in your position to be so friendly with the staff. And some people are wondering about his motives." "His motives?" Eleanor's voice went sharp with anger. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Eleanor, please don't make me say it." But Eleanor could fill in the blanks herself. They thought Caleb was taking advantage of her, using her loneliness or vulnerability for his own gain. The idea made her sick with rage and something else she didn't want to name. Shame. "I need to think," Eleanor said, rolling toward her bedroom. "Can you reschedule my afternoon appointments?" "Of course, but Eleanor, don't let other people's small minds ruin something good for you." Eleanor paused in her doorway. "What if they're right, though? What if I'm being naive?" "You're the smartest person I know," Ruth said gently. "Trust your instincts, not their gossip." But as Eleanor sat alone in her room that afternoon, trust felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. She thought about Caleb's gentle voice, his patient hands spotting her as she practiced standing. She thought about the way he looked at her, not like a charity case or a victim, but like a whole person worthy of respect. Then she thought about the whispers, the judgment, the assumptions people were making about both of them. Was she being selfish, asking him to risk his reputation for her small dreams of walking again? That evening, Eleanor made her way down to the building's small library, hoping to find a quiet place to think. Instead, she found Caleb restocking the shelves with cleaning supplies, his movements efficient and careful. He looked up when she entered, and his smile faded when he saw her expression. "Everything okay?" he asked. "People are talking," Eleanor said without preamble. "About us, about what they think we're doing." Caleb's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What kind of talk?" "The kind you'd expect. Questions about your motives, about whether it's appropriate for me to spend time with you." She watched something painful flicker across Caleb's face before he carefully controlled his expression. "I see. I don't want to cause problems for you at work. If people are making assumptions, let me worry about my job," Caleb interrupted gently. "The question is whether this is causing problems for you." Eleanor looked at him, really looked. He was a good man trying to help her, and people were twisting that into something ugly because of who they were, because of the color of their skin and the difference in their social positions. "It's not fair," she said quietly. "No, it's not. But fair doesn't really factor into most people's thinking." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of other people's prejudices settling between them like a wall. "Maybe we should stop," Eleanor said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "The exercises, I mean. Maybe it's not worth the complications." Caleb studied her face carefully. "Is that what you want? Or is that what you think you should want?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Eleanor realized she was doing exactly what she'd done for months after the accident, letting other people's fears and limitations define her choices. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm scared, Caleb. Not of you, but of caring about something and having it taken away again." "I understand that fear," Caleb said. "But I've learned that letting other people's opinions control your life is just another kind of prison." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. When did everything get so complicated? "Maybe it was always complicated," Caleb said gently. "Maybe we're just now brave enough to face it." Before Eleanor could respond, the library door opened and Margaret Whitmore walked in, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. "Eleanor, darling, I've been looking everywhere for—" Margaret stopped short when she saw Caleb. Her smile became politely distant. "Oh, I didn't realize you were meeting with staff?" Eleanor felt the careful distance in her mother's voice and knew that the whispers had reached Margaret's ears, too. "Mother, this is Caleb Morris. Caleb, my mother, Margaret Whitmore." Caleb stood and nodded respectfully. "Mrs. Whitmore, it's a pleasure to meet you." Margaret's response was coolly polite. "Mr. Morris, I hope you're taking good care of our building." "I do my best, ma'am." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Eleanor could see her mother taking in every detail: Caleb's work clothes, his respectful posture, the way he didn't try to shake her hand or presume familiarity. "Well," Margaret said after an uncomfortable pause. "Eleanor, when you're finished here, could we have a word? There are some family matters I need to discuss with you." "Of course," Eleanor said, though her heart was sinking. Margaret nodded to Caleb again and left the library, but not before Eleanor caught the worried look on her face. "I should go," Caleb said quietly. "But Eleanor, whatever your mother wants to talk about, remember that you're an adult who gets to make her own choices." Eleanor nodded, but she already felt the weight of her family's expectations pressing down on her. As she rolled toward the elevator to face whatever lecture was waiting, she wondered if having choices meant anything when using them came at such a high cost. Margaret was waiting in Eleanor's living room, standing by the windows with her back straight and her hands clasped. It was her serious conversation posture, one Eleanor remembered from childhood lectures about behavior and expectations. "Mother, before you say anything—" "Sit down, darling." Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "Please." Eleanor positioned her wheelchair across from her mother's chair, preparing for the worst. "I've been hearing things," Margaret began. "Concerns from other residents. Questions about your association with that maintenance worker. His name is Caleb, and there's nothing inappropriate about our association." I'm sure you believe that, Margaret said carefully. But perception matters, Eleanor, especially for someone in your position. My position? You mean my wheelchair? I mean your position as a Whitmore, as a young woman who owns property in this building and has responsibilities to the community here. Eleanor felt anger rising in her chest. So, I'm not allowed to be friendly with the staff because it might make other residents uncomfortable? It's not about being friendly, Margaret said, moving to sit across from Eleanor. It's about maintaining appropriate boundaries and protecting yourself from people who might take advantage of your situation. My situation, Eleanor repeated flatly. You mean my disability? Margaret flinched. I mean your vulnerability. Darling, you've been through so much. Trauma. Sometimes that makes us reach out for connection in ways that aren't wise. The implication hit Eleanor like a slap. Her mother thought she was so desperate for male attention that she'd fallen for the first man who showed her kindness. You think I'm so pathetic that I'd mistake professional courtesy for romantic interest? Eleanor said, her voice dangerously quiet. I think you're lonely and hurting, and sometimes lonely people make choices they later regret. Eleanor stared at her mother, seeing not just worry, but fear in Margaret's eyes. Fear that Eleanor was making a mistake, fear that she was being used, fear that the family's reputation might be damaged. What if it's not a mistake? Eleanor asked suddenly. What if Caleb is exactly what he appears to be? A good man who's trying to help me? Then he would understand the position he's putting you in, Margaret replied. A man with integrity would step back rather than expose you to gossip and speculation. Eleanor felt something cold settle in her stomach. Her mother's words made a terrible kind of sense. If Caleb truly cared about her well-being, wouldn't he protect her from the whispers and judgment? I don't want to fight with you, Margaret continued, her voice softening. I just want to protect you. You're all I have left, Eleanor. I can't stand to watch you get hurt again. The raw emotion in her mother's voice broke something in Eleanor's chest. She could see the genuine love and fear behind Margaret's concerns, even if she disagreed with them. I'm not trying to get hurt, Eleanor said quietly. I'm trying to get better. There are other ways to get better. Professional ways, safe ways. Eleanor nodded, not because she agreed, but because she was too emotionally drained to keep fighting. I'll think about what you said. Margaret leaned forward and took Eleanor's hands. That's all I ask. Just promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't let anyone take advantage of your kind heart. I promise, Eleanor said, and meant it, even though she wasn't sure what she was promising to protect herself from. After Margaret left, Eleanor sat alone in her darkening apartment, feeling more isolated than she had in months. The hope that had been growing inside her felt fragile now, threatened by doubt and other people's fears. She thought about Caleb's steady voice, telling her she was stronger than she knew. She thought about her mother's worried face and her uncle's sudden interest in staff protocols. She thought about the whispers following her through the building like shadows. For the first time since she'd started working with Caleb, Eleanor wondered if the cost of hope was too high for both of them to pay. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Eleanor was still in her pajamas, drinking coffee and trying to decide whether to cancel her session with Caleb, when Ruth announced that Thomas was at the door. At 8 a.m? Eleanor frowned. What could be so urgent? She soon found out. Thomas entered her apartment with a woman Eleanor didn't recognize, a professional-looking woman in her 40s with a kind but businesslike demeanor. Eleanor, I'd like you to meet Sarah Chen, Thomas said. She runs a private healthcare services company. I thought you might be interested in hearing about some of the programs they offer. Eleanor's blood ran cold. This wasn't a casual introduction. This was an intervention. "I'm not sure I understand," Eleanor said carefully. Sarah stepped forward with a warm smile. "Mr. Whitmore explained that you've been working on some physical rehabilitation goals. I wanted to discuss how our team might be able to support those efforts. I already have physical therapists." "Of course," Sarah said smoothly. "But sometimes clients benefit from more intensive, personalized support. We offer in-home services with trained professionals who can work with you daily, helping you achieve your mobility goals safely and efficiently." Eleanor looked between Sarah and Thomas, understanding dawning on her. This wasn't about improving her care. This was about replacing Caleb. "This is very sudden," Eleanor said. "I wasn't looking for new services." "But you've been exploring additional therapeutic options," Thomas said. "I thought you might appreciate having professional guidance for those explorations." The careful way he phrased it told Eleanor that he knew exactly what kind of explorations she'd been doing, and with whom. "I need to think about this," Eleanor said. "Sarah, could you leave me some information? I'll review it and get back to you." Sarah handed over a glossy brochure and her business card. "Of course, and please know that we're very discreet. We understand that privacy is important for clients in your position." After they left, Eleanor sat staring at the brochure without seeing it. The message was clear. Her family was offering her a professional alternative to Caleb's help. A safer alternative. A more appropriate alternative. The worst part was that it made sense. Sarah's team probably had more training, better equipment, professional credentials that could help Eleanor make real progress. But they wouldn't have Caleb's quiet faith in her strength. They wouldn't have his patient encouragement or his understanding of what it felt like to be underestimated. They would be helpful and professional and completely unable to see her the way he did, as a whole person, not just a collection of limitations to be managed. Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text from Caleb. "Still on for this morning? No pressure if you need to reschedule." She stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "Yes, same time, same place." Whatever her family's fears and whatever the gossips might say, Eleanor wasn't ready to give up on the small miracle of standing on her own 2 feet. Not yet. But as she got dressed for her session with Caleb, she couldn't shake the feeling that forces beyond her control were closing in, threatening to end their partnership before it really had a chance to begin. The building felt different as she made her way to the fitness room, more watchful, more judgmental. Eleanor held her head high and tried to ignore the stares, but she could feel the weight of everyone's expectations and opinions pressing down on her shoulders. When she reached the fitness room, Caleb was waiting with his usual calm presence and encouraging smile. For a moment, looking at him, Eleanor felt her doubts fade. Here was someone who believed in her strength when everyone else saw only her vulnerability. But as they began their session, Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about the choice looming ahead of her. Safety or hope? Family approval or personal growth? The easy path or the one that might lead somewhere amazing? The answer should have been simple, but nothing about love, and Eleanor was beginning to realize that's what this was, had ever been simple at all. 2 weeks passed in a careful dance of routine and restraint. Eleanor continued her sessions with Caleb, but now Ruth made sure to be present for the first few minutes of each meeting, officially there to review scheduling, but really serving as a witness to their professional boundaries. Eleanor hated the necessity of it, but she understood the protection it offered both of them. Still, the whispers hadn't completely stopped. If anything, they'd evolved into something more pointed, more personal. She discovered just how personal on a gray Thursday morning when she found a folded piece of paper slipped under her door. "Be careful who you trust," the note read in careful block letters. "Some people aren't what they seem. Eleanor's hands trembled as she read it again. Someone had taken the time to write this, to walk to her door, to slide it underneath like a threat. The anonymity made it worse. She had no idea who might be watching her, judging her, deciding she needed to be warned away from her own choices. "Ruth!" she called, her voice sharper than intended. Ruth appeared from the kitchen, took one look at Eleanor's face, and immediately moved closer. "What's wrong?" Eleanor handed her the note without a word. Ruth read it twice, her expression growing darker with each pass. "We need to report this," Ruth said immediately. "This is harassment." "Report it to whom? Building management?" "My Uncle Thomas runs building management." Ruth's face fell as she realized the impossible position Eleanor was in. "Then we'll figure out who wrote it ourselves." "No?" Eleanor took the note back and crumpled it in her fist. "I don't want to turn this into some kind of investigation. That would just make everything worse." But the note had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. The idea that someone was watching her closely enough to have opinions about her private choices felt invasive and threatening. That afternoon, Eleanor made her way to the fitness room with unusual anxiety. She'd been looking forward to her session with Caleb. They'd been working on supported walking between the parallel bars, and she'd managed 3 full steps yesterday. But now, even that small joy felt tainted by unknown eyes, watching and judging. Caleb noticed her mood immediately. He had a gift for reading the subtle changes in her posture, the set of her shoulders, the way she held her hands. "Rough day?" he asked gently, beginning their usual equipment check. "Someone left a note under my door this morning, warning me to be careful about who I trust." Caleb's movement stilled for just a moment before he continued adjusting the parallel bars. "I'm sorry that happened." "Are you? Or are you relieved that someone else is saying what you've been thinking?" The question came out harsher than Eleanor intended, but the note had left her feeling defensive and vulnerable. Caleb turned to face her fully, his expression serious but not hurt. "What do you think I've been thinking?" "That this is getting complicated. That maybe we should stop before one of us gets hurt." "Is that what you want? To stop?" Eleanor looked into his steady brown eyes and felt her defensiveness crumble. "No, but I don't want you to lose your job because of me. I don't want people to think that I'm taking advantage of you." The words hung in the air between them. Eleanor nodded, unable to say it herself. "Eleanor," Caleb said quietly, "I need you to understand something. I've been dealing with people's assumptions about my motives my entire life. A black man in service work? People always think they know why I'm being helpful, what I'm really after." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. She'd been so focused on protecting herself from gossip that she hadn't considered what the whispers might be doing to him. "I'm sorry. I didn't think—" "You don't need to apologize. But you need to decide whether you trust me or whether you trust their assumptions. Because I can't keep helping you if you're going to doubt my intentions every time someone whispers in your ear." The quiet firmness in his voice stopped Eleanor short. She realized she'd been doing exactly what she hated when others did it to her, letting other people's fears override her own judgment. "I do trust you," she said. "I'm just scared." "Of what?" Eleanor took a shaky breath. "Of caring about this, about you, about the possibility that I might actually walk again. Because if it doesn't work out, if something goes wrong, I don't think I can survive hoping and losing again." Caleb's expression softened with understanding. "Hope is terrifying when you've been disappointed before." "How do you do it?" How do you keep believing in good things when the world keeps proving you wrong? Caleb was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. My grandmother used to say that hope isn't about knowing things will work out. It's about believing they're worth fighting for, even when you don't. No. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. What if I'm not worth fighting for? That's not even a question, Caleb said simply. You are absolutely worth fighting for. The question is whether you believe it enough to fight for yourself. Before Eleanor could respond, the fitness room door opened, and Margaret Whitmore walked in, her face carefully composed, but her eyes sharp with concern. Eleanor, darling, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Eleanor's heart sank. Her mother's unexpected appearance could only mean one thing. Someone had told her about the increased time Eleanor was spending in the fitness room. Mother, this is unexpected. Margaret's gaze moved between Eleanor and Caleb with polite attention. I was hoping to discuss some family matters, but I see you're busy with your exercises. The pause before exercises was slight but loaded with meaning. Eleanor could see her mother taking in the parallel bars, Eleanor's position near the equipment, Caleb's respectful distance. We were just finishing up, Eleanor said quickly. Actually, Caleb interjected, we hadn't started yet. Miss Whitmore, would you like me to show your mother some of the progress you've been making? Eleanor's breath caught. Caleb was offering to demonstrate her achievements to Margaret, to show her mother that their time together was producing real results. Margaret looked surprised, but intrigued. What sort of progress? Eleanor felt a moment of panic. What if she couldn't perform today? What if the stress and emotion made her weak, clumsy, unable to show the strength she'd been building? But then she looked at Caleb's encouraging face and remembered his grandmother's words about hope being worth fighting for. I can stand, Eleanor said simply, and I can take steps. Margaret's carefully controlled expression cracked with shock. Stand? Eleanor, are you sure that's safe? Your doctor said, with support, Eleanor clarified quickly. With the parallel bars and someone spotting me, nothing dangerous. She positioned her wheelchair next to the bars and locked the wheels, aware of her mother watching every movement. Caleb moved to where he could assist if needed, but stayed far enough back to give Eleanor space to succeed or fail on her own terms. Eleanor gripped the bars and pushed herself up from her chair. Her legs shook with effort, but they held her weight. She stood for a moment, breathing hard, before taking one careful step forward. Then another. By the third step, tears were streaming down Margaret's face. Oh my God, Margaret whispered. Eleanor, you're walking. Eleanor lowered herself back to her wheelchair, exhausted but triumphant. She looked at her mother's stunned expression and saw something she hadn't expected, not concern or disapproval, but pride and amazement. How long have you been able to do this? Margaret asked, her voice thick with emotion. We've been working on it for a few weeks, Eleanor admitted, building up strength gradually. Margaret turned to Caleb with the expression Eleanor had never seen her mother direct toward service staff. Genuine gratitude mixed with something like awe. You did this? You helped her learn to walk again? I just provided support, Caleb said humbly. Miss Whitmore did all the hard work. Margaret studied Caleb's face for a long moment, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. I made assumptions about your intentions that were unfair and unkind. No apology necessary, Mrs. Whitmore. You were protecting your daughter. Yes, but I was protecting her from the wrong things. Margaret looked back at Eleanor with tears still shining in her eyes. I was so afraid of you getting hurt that I couldn't see you getting stronger. Eleanor felt her own tears threatening. Mother? No, let me say this. Margaret moved closer to Eleanor's chair. I've been treating you like you were still the broken girl from the hospital 18 months ago. But you're not broken, are you? You're healing. And I almost stopped that healing because I was too frightened to let you try. The three of them stood in silence for a moment, the weight of Margaret's realization settling over them. Eleanor had spent so long fighting her family's protectiveness that she'd almost forgotten her mother's fears came from love, not control. What happens now? Margaret asked finally. Eleanor looked at Caleb, then back at her mother. Now we keep working, keep building strength, keep hoping. Margaret nodded slowly. And if anyone has anything to say about it, they can say it to me. The fierceness in her mother's voice surprised Eleanor. Margaret Whitmore might be protective, but she was also formidable when defending the people she loved. Thank you, Eleanor said softly. Don't thank me yet, Margaret replied. I still have to deal with Thomas. Eleanor's stomach dropped. She'd been so focused on winning her mother's support that she'd forgotten about her uncle's concerns and his mysterious interest in upgrading staff protocols. What about Uncle Thomas? Margaret's expression grew determined. Leave Thomas to me. Some battles are better fought by someone with nothing to lose. As Margaret prepared to leave, she turned back to Caleb one more time. Mr. Morris, she said formally. Thank you for believing in my daughter when the rest of us had stopped believing in possibilities. She made it easy to believe, Caleb replied. She's remarkable. After Margaret left, Eleanor and Caleb found themselves alone with the echo of everything that had just changed between them and her family. That was unexpected, Eleanor said finally. Good unexpected or bad unexpected? Eleanor considered the question. Her mother's support would make everything easier, but it also raised the stakes. Now people would be watching not just for scandal, but for results. Good, she decided. Definitely good. But Caleb? Yeah? Promise me something. Promise me that no matter what happens with my family or the gossip or any of it, you won't disappear on me. I need to know that if I keep hoping, you'll keep believing. Caleb moved closer, his eyes serious and warm. I promise. No disappearing. We're in this together, whatever comes next. Eleanor nodded, feeling something settle in her chest that she hadn't realized was holding its breath. For the first time since the whispers started, she felt like maybe hope and love could survive other people's fears after all. But even as relief flooded through her, Eleanor knew that winning her mother's support was only the first battle. There were still forces working against them, still people who saw their connection as something to be stopped rather than celebrated. The real test was yet to come. 3 days after Margaret's visit to the fitness room, Thomas Whitmore arrived at Eleanor's apartment with Sarah Chen and a folder full of paperwork. Eleanor knew immediately that her uncle hadn't been swayed by whatever conversation he'd had with her mother. Eleanor, Thomas said, settling into her living room with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. I think it's time we discussed your future care plan more seriously. Sarah opened her folder and spread several documents across Eleanor's coffee table. We've prepared a comprehensive program that would provide you with round-the-clock professional support. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, even psychological counseling if needed. Eleanor glanced at the papers without picking them up. I'm not sure I need round-the-clock anything, Uncle Thomas. Given your recent activities, I think professional supervision would be wise, Thomas replied. We can't have you taking unnecessary risks. The careful way he said activities told Eleanor exactly what this was about. Someone, probably the same person who'd left the warning note, had been reporting her sessions with Caleb to Thomas. What I do with my time is my business, Eleanor said evenly. Not when it affects the building's reputation, not when it puts our insurance liability at risk. Thomas leaned forward, his voice taking on the tone he used for business negotiations. Eleanor, I've tried to be patient with this friendship you've developed with our maintenance staff, but it's gone too far. Too far how? You're spending hours alone with a man we barely know, engaging in physical activities that could result in serious injury. Do you have any idea what kind of lawsuit we could face if something goes wrong? Eleanor felt anger rise in her chest. So this is about money? This is about protecting you and protecting our family's interests, Thomas said firmly. Which is why I've already spoken with building management about transferring Mr. Morris to another property. The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. You can't do that. I can, and I will, unless you agree to work with Sarah's team instead. Professional therapists, proper equipment, appropriate supervision. Eleanor looked at Sarah, who had the grace to appear uncomfortable with the ultimatum she was being used to deliver. This isn't about my safety, Eleanor said quietly. This is about you not trusting my judgment. Your judgment has been compromised, Thomas replied. Anyone can see that you've developed inappropriate feelings for this man. That kind of emotional entanglement clouds your ability to make rational decisions. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Eleanor could deny it, could insist that her relationship with Caleb was purely professional. But that would be a lie, and she was tired of living according to other people's definitions of what was appropriate. You're right, she said simply. I do have feelings for him. Thomas's face went red. Eleanor? I have feelings for a man who treats me with respect, who believes in my strength, who sees possibilities instead of limitations. If that compromises my judgment, then I'm happy to have compromised judgment. Sarah quietly began gathering her papers. Perhaps I should leave you to discuss this as a family? No, stay, Eleanor said. I want you to hear this too, since Uncle Thomas seems to think your services are the solution to my terrible decision-making. She turned back to Thomas, her voice steady despite the anger coursing through her. You want to know what's inappropriate? It's you thinking you can control who I care about because you don't approve of their job or their skin color. It's you assuming that a good man can't have honest intentions toward me because I'm in a wheelchair. It's you treating me like I'm too damaged or desperate to know the difference between kindness and manipulation. Thomas's mouth opened and closed without sound. Eleanor had never spoken to him so directly, so angrily. Caleb has helped me accomplish something my expensive doctors said was impossible, Eleanor continued. He's helped me stand up, literally and figuratively. And if you think I'm going to let you take that away because it makes you uncomfortable, you're wrong. Eleanor, please be reasonable. I am being reasonable. You're the one making threats and ultimatums. Eleanor moved her wheelchair closer to Thomas, holding his gaze steadily. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave Caleb alone. You're not going to transfer him, fire him, or make his life difficult in any way. And you're going to stop treating me like a child who can't make her own decisions. And if I don't? Eleanor had been dreading this moment, but now that it was here, she felt calm and certain. Then I'll move out of this building. I'll sell my shares back to the family and find somewhere else to live. Somewhere I can choose my own friends and my own care without interference. Thomas went pale. Eleanor's shares in the building represented a significant portion of the family's real estate holdings. More than that, her leaving would be a public statement that the family couldn't even keep their own daughter happy in their own property. You wouldn't, he said quietly. Try me. They stared at each other for a long moment, uncle and niece locked in a battle of wills that had been building for months. Finally, Thomas stood up and straightened his tie. "I need time to think about this." "Take all the time you need," Eleanor replied. "But while you're thinking, remember that I'm not the helpless victim you think I am. I'm a grown woman who's capable of making good decisions, including the decision to fight for what matters to me." After Thomas and Sarah left, Eleanor sat alone in her living room, shaking with adrenaline and fear. She'd just threatened her uncle with consequences that would uproot her entire life. She wasn't sure if she was brave or foolish, but she knew she couldn't live with herself if she let Thomas destroy the best thing that had happened to her in months. Her phone buzzed with a text from Caleb. "Heard there was some excitement today. You okay?" Eleanor smiled despite her anxiety. News traveled fast in the building, especially when it involved raised voices in the Whitmore family. She typed back, "Can we meet? I have some things to tell you." "Of course. Usual place?" "Actually, let's meet in the rooftop garden. It's time we stopped hiding." An hour later, Eleanor found Caleb waiting by the garden's small fountain, the city skyline stretching out behind him in the late afternoon light. He looked concerned, but not surprised. Clearly, word of her confrontation with Thomas had already reached him. "How much trouble are we in?" he asked as she approached. "That depends on how you define trouble." Eleanor positioned her wheelchair beside the bench where Caleb was sitting. "Thomas wants to transfer you to another building. He's also trying to force me to work with a professional care team instead of you." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he nodded as if he'd been expecting this. "What did you tell him?" "That if he touches your job or tries to control my choices, I'll move out of the building and sell my shares back to the family." Caleb's eyes widened. "Eleanor, you can't make that kind of threat for me. This is your home, your family's business." "Which is exactly why the threat will work," Eleanor interrupted. "Thomas knows I mean it, and he knows the consequences would be worse for the family than for me." "But what if he calls your bluff?" Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "It's not a bluff. I'd rather start over somewhere new than live somewhere that I can't choose who to care about." Caleb was quiet for a moment, processing the magnitude of what she'd just said. "You'd really leave all this for me?" "I'd leave all this for us, for the possibility that there might be an us." The words hung in the evening air between them, honest and vulnerable and terrifying. Eleanor had finally said what they'd both been thinking, but neither had dared to voice. "Eleanor," Caleb said softly, "you need to understand what you're saying, what you'd be taking on. Tell me. Dating me, being with me, it's not just about the gossip in this building. It's about every restaurant we walk into, every social event you attend, every family gathering where people stare and whisper and assume things about both of us." Eleanor considered this, thinking about the note under her door, the whispers in the elevator, the assumptions people had already been making. "And you need to understand something too," she said finally. "I'm not just talking about dating you. I'm talking about building something real with a man who sees me as whole and capable and strong. If other people can't handle that, it says more about them than it does about us." Caleb reached over and took her hand, the first time he'd touched her outside of their physical therapy sessions. His skin was warm and calloused and gentle. "Are you sure? Really sure? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back to pretending we're just patient and therapist." Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, dark skin against light, strong fingers intertwined. It should have been a simple gesture, but she knew that in their world, even this much would be seen as a statement. "I'm sure," she said. The question is whether you're willing to take the risk. Caleb lifted their joined hands and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles. I've been willing since the day I met you. I was just waiting for you to be ready to fight for us. Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being honest about what she wanted. So, what happens now? She asked. Now we see if your uncle is as smart as he thinks he is, and if he's not. Caleb squeezed her hand gently. We figure out what comes next together. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the city, two people who had found something rare and precious and were willing to fight to keep it. Eleanor thought about all the risks ahead, her family's potential disapproval, the gossip and stares, the possibility that Thomas might actually call her bluff and force her to start over somewhere new. But for the first time in months, the risks felt manageable because she wouldn't be facing them alone. She had Caleb's steady presence, his quiet strength, his unwavering belief in her capabilities. Most importantly, she had the knowledge that she was strong enough to stand up, literally and figuratively, for what mattered to her. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to build together. And that was enough. 2 weeks later, Eleanor stood in her bathroom, looking at herself in the mirror as she prepared for what might be the most important dinner of her life. Tonight, she was introducing Caleb to her family as her boyfriend, not her physical therapist. The transformation in her appearance over the past months was subtle but unmistakable. She stood straighter, smiled more easily, carried herself with a confidence that had been missing since her accident. Love, it turned out, was the best physical therapy of all. A soft knock at her door interrupted her preparations. She opened it to find Caleb standing in the hallway, wearing a navy blue suit that made him look handsome and distinguished and slightly nervous. "Ready for this?" he asked, offering her a single white rose. Eleanor accepted the flower and smiled. "Are you?" "No, but I'm ready to try." They made their way to the building's private dining room, where Margaret and Thomas were already waiting. Thomas had ultimately chosen not to call Eleanor's bluff, but the decision had come with conditions, including this formal dinner, where Eleanor would introduce her young man properly to the family. Margaret rose when they entered, her smile genuine and warm. Thomas remained seated, his expression carefully neutral. "Caleb," Margaret said, moving forward to shake his hand. "Thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy." "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Whitmore." Thomas nodded stiffly. "Mr. Morris." As they settled around the table, Eleanor felt the familiar anxiety that came with family gatherings. But Caleb's presence beside her was steadying, reminding her that she was no longer facing these dynamics alone. "Caleb," Margaret said as they began their meal, "Eleanor tells me you grew up in North Carolina?" "Yes, ma'am. Small town outside Charlotte. My grandmother raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. Eleanor watched her family's faces as Caleb spoke simply and honestly about his background. His grandmother's faith, his scholarship to community college, his decision to move north for better job opportunities. He didn't try to impress them or pretend to be something he wasn't. He was simply himself, kind, intelligent, grounded, and completely devoted to Eleanor's happiness. "What are your intentions toward my niece?" Thomas asked abruptly, his businessman's directness cutting through the polite dinner conversation. Eleanor tensed, but Caleb answered calmly. "To love her, support her, and respect her choices. To be worthy of the faith she's placed in me." "And professionally? Do you plan to continue working in building maintenance?" "I'm actually completing my certification as a physical therapy assistant," Caleb said. "Eleanor's progress inspired me to pursue more formal training in rehabilitation work." This was news to Eleanor, and she looked at him with surprise and pride. When did you decide that? About a month ago, Caleb admitted. Watching your determination made me realize I wanted to help more people discover their own strength. Margaret's eyes softened with emotion. That's wonderful, Caleb. Even Thomas looked slightly impressed, though he tried to hide it. As the evening progressed, Eleanor watched her family slowly warm to Caleb. Margaret was charmed by his quiet humor and obvious devotion to Eleanor. Thomas, while still reserved, seemed to respect Caleb's straightforward answers and clear ambitions. But the real turning point came when Eleanor excused herself to use the restroom. She took longer than usual, wanting to give her family a chance to speak freely with Caleb without her presence. When she returned, she found them deep in conversation about Eleanor's progress and goals. She's accomplished more in the past few months than she had in the previous year, Thomas was saying. Whatever you're doing, it's working. I'm not doing anything special, Caleb replied. I'm just giving her space to be as strong as she already was. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes at the simple truth of that statement. Caleb, she said, returning to her seat, would you like to show them what we've been working on? Caleb looked surprised. Here? Now? Why not? This room has enough space, and I want them to see how far we've come. With Caleb's help, Eleanor transferred from her wheelchair to a standing position, using the back of her chair for support. She took careful, deliberate steps across the room. Not many, but enough to demonstrate the miracle of her mobility. Margaret cried quietly as Eleanor walked back to her chair. Thomas wiped his eyes and looked away, overwhelmed by the proof of his niece's determination and recovery. How did you know she could do this? Margaret asked Caleb. I didn't know, Caleb admitted, but I believed it was possible, and I believed she was strong enough to make it happen. Thomas cleared his throat and looked directly at Caleb for the first time all evening. Mr. Morris, he said formally, I owe you an apology. I misjudged your character and your motives, and I nearly cost my niece something precious because of my own prejudices and fears. Caleb nodded graciously. We all want to protect the people we love, Mr. Whitmore. Sometimes that means learning to let them take risks. As the dinner wound down, Eleanor felt a deep sense of peace settling over her. Her family hadn't just accepted Caleb, they'd begun to genuinely respect and appreciate him. Later, as Caleb walked her back to her apartment, Eleanor reflected on how much had changed in just a few short months. Thank you, she said as they stopped at her door. For what? For seeing me, for believing in me, for helping me remember who I am? Caleb cupped her face gently in his hands. Thank you for being brave enough to let me love you. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was their first real kiss, and it tasted like hope and new beginnings and the courage to build something beautiful together. What happens now? Eleanor asked when they broke apart. Now we keep walking, Caleb said with a smile. Step by step, day by day, together. Eleanor smiled back, feeling stronger and more hopeful than she had in years. She had learned to walk again, but more importantly, she had learned to trust in love, in herself, and in the possibility that sometimes the most unexpected connections could lead to the most extraordinary transformations. The future stretched ahead of them, full of challenges and joys, and the simple miracle of two people who had found each other against all odds. And Eleanor knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, step by realistic, beautiful step. The end